Hello and welcome to Jessie James Beads. I'd like to show you today how to make a very simple but very useful J-hook. This is the type of item which is an absolute lifesaver when creating jewellery and you can't find the right kind of clasp. I'm going to show you how to make this clasp, which will work with chain or a closed loop at the other end, and it's a very simple procedure to run through. Now I have a short length. This is around 3.5 to 4 inches of some round copper. This is copper round wire in 18 gauge or approximately 1mm. The first thing I'm going to do, as we always do with wire, is straighten and warm the section that we're working with today. Now the J clasp is super accessible and super useful, as I say. This is probably a little bit more wire than we actually need, but it gives me an opportunity to make quite a large size for you. So I'm going to come about 1 inch from one end and I'm going to turn a right angle on that section of 18 gauge wire. Once I have my right angle in position, I'm going to use my round nose pliers. Now you could use your bail makers if you prefer, if you wanted a much larger loop. We're starting at this end. So this is the loop that would sit onto chain or onto the end of your beading thread. So I'm just going to create myself a wrapped loop to begin with, turn the wire around until I get the first half of that round shape into position. Once I've got the first half going, I'm going to pop those pliers back in and bring the tail all the way around so that we complete that round form. If it goes out of shape slightly, you can take the opportunity to just tidy that up. Now I'm going to show you now how this would attach to a length of chain or into the loop of a bracelet or a necklace that you've created. So I'm just going to pop some chain into the end section like so, and just allow that to sit inside the circular form we've created. If I just switch my grip slightly, it enables me to bring those pliers around and hold that into position. Now I haven't centralised my loop very well, so I'm just going to organise that a little bit better so that the round form sits centrally on the straight remainder of the wire. So I'm just going to hold what could be your bracelet or necklace or section of beading thread out of the way, and I'm going to grip across the centre of that circular form and take the tail around and underneath that wire. I'm just going to push that up from underneath so you can see that we're starting to create coils around the centre core of our wire. Now you may like to, at this stage, bring in a second pair of pliers to help you. What I'm going to do is just support the loop, but I'm not going to crush the chain or the bracelet or the necklace or whatever it is we're making to connect our J hook to. I'm going to support that loop, and then I'm just going to chase that tail of wire all the way around. Very small movements are better because you have greater control over how that wire sits. Once I've got those coils into position, let me just take that tail out of the way a second. Once I've got those coils into position, what I'd like to do is just chase the wire around slightly in the direction that the cut end is travelling. So the wire's coming over the top and has been cut. So I'm going to move my pliers around in the same direction. Now if you do this very firmly, you will make the loop itself slightly smaller, which is something that you might wish to do. If not, we're just very gently rotating those pliers around to smooth the end. Now to create the J part of the J hook, I don't really think it looks terribly like a J, but never mind. I'm just going to give a little bit more warmth and heat into the design, and what we're going to do now is orient this so that the best side of your coil fits outwards. So in my mind, when you're adding a J hook to jewellery, you will want the looped section of the hook itself to be sitting up and away from the skin. It makes it easier for me to put jewellery on, but it is entirely what is your personal preference. So if I pop that back down, I'm going to have a look at which is the most attractive aspect of my coiling. This looks prettier, so I'm going to support the central section of that core and then push the wire gently away from me. Now it doesn't go at 90 degrees, it's more like 45 degrees. Now you may wish to just add a little bit of extra warmth at this stage. You could use a pencil, you could use your bail makers, you could use your round nose pliers for the next segment. I'm going to grab my bail makers because I have them to hand. So what I'm going to do is decide how large I want the very rounded section of my J hook to be. This one is relatively diminutive, which I would use perhaps for a bracelet. Let's make a much larger one together today. I'm going to choose step number 6 on my stepped bail making pliers. So I'm going to pop those into position, a little bit away from the angle that we created, and just roll that around slightly. So I've created the first part of that shape. Pop my pliers back into position, and then I'm going to take the tail all the way over as if we were going to make another wrapped loop. So this is a nice, very rounded, oversized loop that we're creating. Now I'm working in the 18 gauge wire. If this was going to be a J-hook of this kind of size, I may consider using a 16 gauge wire. Now 16 gauge wire is a little trickier to get that neat coil going, but it is worth it because once it's done and dusted, it's much more hard wearing. I will, however, in a moment show you how to take this a little bit more firmly so that it will in fact last longer in wear. So what we're going to do now is put a very small loop on the section that crosses over. So if I pop my pliers into position, you can see exactly where that's being held. I'm going to take the tail of wire all the way around and back on itself. You may wish to take the pliers out and switch them to the other prong and just get that so it sits like a very, very small loop. The next thing that we're going to do is trim away the excess that we do not need. So again, with your flush cutters, you take the flush cut to the side that you're wishing to keep, and the concave side away from you towards the excess that's being trimmed out of the design. So if I put my flush cutters into position, I always take a second to look, make sure I'm gripping the correct section of wire before I make that cut and pop the excess in the scrap pot. So what I would do now is just to make sure that everything is completely flat, you can just take an extra moment to get that sitting neatly and into position. Once you're happy with how that looks, what we would do is strengthen that up slightly. So one of the simplest things that you can do is open and close flat facing pliers on your completed form. So you must make sure that you're happy with how the design is sitting before you do this. Another thing that you can do is pop a steel block underneath and very gently hammer. If you are going to go the hammering route, my suggestion would be to support this section whilst you hammer here first, and in that way you set that curvature. If you start hammering a little bit more closely down here, this can open out slightly. Only very, very gentle strikes are needed to bring that up to strength. Or as I say, you can use a firmer wire to begin with. So for me, for right now, I'm just going to open and close the flat faces of my pliers all the way around the single line of wire and just make that just a tiny bit stronger. And what can happen then is that this can go into your chain at the other end. It can if you've got your glasses on anyway. So pop that through the loop of the chain and then you have a completed circuit. This will also work with small loops made in beading thread.